Imagine this. The palace is asleep, the corridor is silent, and only one man remains awake, a man the world never knew, but who guarded Prince William's children with loyalty so fierce the palace tried to erase every trace of him. His name was never printed in newspapers. His story was never told at royal events. Yet behind those bright royal portraits and smiling balcony appearances, he was fighting a secret war, a war the family didn't even know existed. And tonight we uncover it. If stories like this fascinate you, the hidden protectors, the unseen risks, the real human sacrifices behind royal glamour, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves a good royal mystery. It helps the channel more than you think. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. He wasn't born into royalty. He didn't come from a well-known military family. He didn't have the kind of name that echoed through the walls of Buckingham Palace. But somehow, even in a place full of ceremonies and traditions, Thomas Crane blended into the background so perfectly that people often forgot he was there. And maybe that's why he noticed things others didn't. On his first morning inside Kensington Palace, he arrived early, too early. The sun had barely risen. The air still cold. The grounds quiet except for the soft scraping of gardeners trimming hedges. Thomas stood near the side entrance, hands clasped, coat tight against the wind. He watched people come and go. Staff rush inside with trays, folders, laundry carts. Guards changed posts with formal precision. Everything looked normal. But to Thomas, normal was something you never trusted. He'd spent years learning that the moments people ignored, the quick glances, the strange pauses, the misplaced vehicles, were often the moments that mattered most. He wasn't assigned to William's children at first. No, that job went to the senior officers with polished resumes and decades of service. Thomas was placed on perimeter duty, boring, repetitive, predictable. Gates, fences, security cameras. His job was to keep outsiders out. Nothing heroic, nothing glamorous. But even from the outside, he found himself studying the rhythm of daily life inside the palace. The times when staff arrived, the way drivers positioned the cars, which windows lit up at night. Even the sound of footsteps became familiar to him. He never said much. He listened, observed, and over time, he noticed that something inside the palace wasn't as perfect as it appeared. One night, late, cold, unusually quiet, Thomas saw a flicker of movement outside the fence line. Not the kind of movement you see from foxes or wandering tourists. This was steady, controlled, a person who knew exactly where to stand. The man wore dark clothes. No phone, no camera, just watching. Thomas approached his supervisor immediately. Someone's outside the north wall. No device, no reason to be there. His supervisor didn't even look up from his clipboard. Probably a paparazzi trying to be smart. Ignore it, Crane. We got protocols. Protocols. The word people use to avoid action. Thomas didn't argue. He simply filed the moment away in his mind, like slipping a note into a locked drawer only he had the key to. He kept watching. And 2 weeks later, on a rainy, miserable night, the same man returned. Only this time, he was closer. Too close. Thomas finished his shift, but instead of heading home, he followed the man from a distance, down side streets, across dim corners, all the way into a cafe near Hyde Park. He watched through the rain-streaked window as the man sat with a woman. They exchanged a folder, and when the man opened it, Thomas saw them, small faces captured in grainy photos. William's children. Something cold gripped him. Hard. He didn't sleep that night. Didn't even try. He went straight to the head of security the next morning, carrying nothing but his memory, and the image burned into his mind. They're watching the children, Thomas said quietly. Those photos weren't taken from outside. The head of security listened, nodded, then said something that felt rehearsed. Thank you, Crane. The matter is being handled. Handled? That was the palace way of saying, leave it alone. But Thomas couldn't. Because once you see a threat aimed at a child, royal or not, you don't unsee it. From that day forward, he changed. He requested different posts. Volunteered for longer shifts. Slowly, quietly, he moved closer to the family. He learned the patterns. Which nanny preferred afternoon walks? Which driver always left the engine running too long? Which cleaners asked too many innocent questions? Which routes took them through blind corners? He built a mental map of every risk, every gap, every person who didn't belong. He wasn't paranoid, just precise. One afternoon, during a scheduled event, he noticed a photographer lingering far from the press zone. The man wasn't aiming at William or Kate. He was waiting, patiently, for the children. Thomas approached carefully, angle calculated, voice calm. "Sir, you're outside the permitted area." The photographer stammered something about artistic shots, but his hands shook, not with fear of Thomas, but with fear of being caught. When Palace security reviewed the man's credentials, half were fake. The other half were copied from a journalist who hadn't worked in months. That night, Thomas came home with a certainty that tightened in his chest. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Someone wasn't just watching the children. They were preparing something. Inside the palace, though, Thomas became an inconvenience. A guard who asked too many questions, filed too many reports, pointed out too many anomalies. But while others rolled their eyes at him, the children never did. They didn't even know he existed. Not truly. They saw uniforms all day long. Guards blended together. But Thomas watched them with a softness that contradicted the steel in his job. A small hand waving from the back seat. A burst of laughter as they ran across a courtyard. A sleepy face pressed against a nanny's shoulder at dusk. Those moments weren't in his job description, but they reminded him why he couldn't walk away. He began keeping his own notes, his own small archive of details. Hidden, organized, protected. And with every passing week, the patterns grew clearer. Someone inside the palace was leaving cracks in the system. Someone inside was making it easier for outsiders to get close. Someone inside wanted the children vulnerable. He didn't know who. He didn't know why. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he didn't step in, something terrible would happen, and the palace would pretend no one could have seen it coming. The turning point arrived late one evening when he received a letter, not through official channels, not from the palace, not even from a known sender. It arrived at his apartment, his private address. Inside was a single typed sentence: "Stop watching, or they will pay the price." His hands shook as he held it, not because he was afraid for himself, because someone knew. Someone was watching him while he watched them. That night, he paced his apartment in the dark, every instinct screaming that he was alone in this. Truly alone. No supervisor would help him. No protocol would protect the children. No manual would guide him. He was one guard against something larger, something organized, something silent. But he'd made his choice the moment he saw those photos in that cafe. If the palace wouldn't protect William's children, then he would. No matter the cost, even if the palace tried to erase him for it. Thomas Crane didn't call anyone after the threatening letter arrived. He didn't report it. He didn't photograph it. He didn't even keep it. He burned it in the kitchen sink while the flame from a single match danced against his fingers. The paper curled black, vanished into ash, and yet the word stayed alive in his mind. Stop watching, or they will pay the price. Most people would have stepped back, taken leave, followed orders. Thomas did the opposite. He sharpened his focus. In the days that followed, he moved through the palace grounds with a new awareness, like a man walking through fog who suddenly sees the outline of something massive moving just ahead of him, something dangerous. The children's routine seemed ordinary enough. Morning lessons, afternoon outings, occasional quiet visits to gardens or staff-only courtyards. Everyone around them moved with professional calm, but now Thomas noticed a tension under the smooth surface. The nanny's eyes darted more than usual. A driver kept checking his mirrors. One of the staff members lingered outside the nursery door too long. Little things. Too little for anyone else to notice, but not for Thomas. On a Tuesday morning, as the children were being prepared for a short visit outside the palace grounds, Thomas stood at his assigned position near the eastern corridor. From here, he could see everything. The cars waiting, the officers checking equipment, the small cluster staff escorting the children. But something bothered him. A new cleaner stood by the rear exit, holding a supply cart. She was watching the children too closely, not with affection, not with curiosity, with calculation. Her eyes flicked from the children to the clock on the wall, then back again. Thomas walked toward her slowly, a casual stride. "Morning," he said. "You knew?" She jumped slightly. "Why, yes, started yesterday." "Where's your ID?" She lifted a badge that didn't match the format from the last security update. The photo was slightly off-center. The lamination looked newer than the rest of the staff's. Thomas smiled politely, like he believed her. "Stay by your cart, please." Then he walked away and discreetly signaled another officer. But by the time they returned, the woman was gone. The cart was gone. The exit door was slightly open. Did anyone authorize her access? Thomas asked sharply. The officer checked his clipboard. No one by that name works today. A chill ran down Thomas's spine. Someone had slipped inside the palace. Someone bold enough to walk into the children's wing. Someone pretending to be staff. And no one had caught her, except Thomas. He filed a report. Again, and again it was dismissed. "Crane, you're seeing shadows where there are none," his supervisor said. "These things happen. Mix-ups, wrong day scheduling. Calm down." But Thomas wasn't calm. Because 3 days after the fake cleaner disappeared, something far worse happened. A message came through the palace email servers. It wasn't sent to Thomas. It wasn't even meant to be found by him, but was routed incorrectly, landing briefly in the wrong queue, one he happened to monitor during a late-night shift. The message was short, encrypted, oddly formatted, but his military background recognized the pattern immediately. Coordinates, a time, a location, and a note: "Prepare the route. Confirm access." Thomas's pulse kicked hard. He decrypted what he could, just enough to realize the date mentioned was 1 week away. And that date matched a public outing schedule for William's children. A park, crowded, open, vulnerable. He traced the email's digital path across multiple servers. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. Layers of masking, international routes, false signatures. By sunrise, Thomas had traced it as far as Eastern Europe. After that, the trail vanished. But he'd seen enough. This wasn't a lone stalker. This wasn't paparazzi. This wasn't random. It was organized, structured, professional. Someone was planning something, and someone inside the palace was helping them. The next morning, Thomas went straight to his supervisor with printouts. "These are coordinates. The timing matches the park visit. Someone is planning to compromise the children's route." His supervisor barely glanced at the papers. "You're overworked. You're misreading things. Get rest. They targeted me at home. They know what I'm doing." "Crane," the supervisor sighed, "if you continue like this, you'll be forced on leave." Thomas stared at him. Leave? While a threat circled the children. Absolutely not. He walked out of the office with the certainty that no one in the chain of command would help him. From that moment on, Thomas operated alone. He reorganized his schedule silently. Swapping shifts where possible. He memorized every possible route to the park. He studied the angles of nearby buildings, the flow of foot traffic, the blind spots the cameras couldn't reach. And then, 6 days before the visit, something happened that confirmed everything he feared. He found a small device near the southern gate. It was hidden behind a utility panel, cleverly positioned, so only someone checking the panel manually would find it. It looked like a radio part, but it wasn't. It was a signal jammer. Small, portable, deadly in a security breach. His entire body went cold. Because a jammer wasn't something a stalker used. It wasn't something a curious outsider used. It was something used by people trained to disrupt communication. People who needed a distraction. People who needed silence. People who needed a window. He took the device straight to the head of security. "This was placed inside palace grounds," Thomas said, voice steady. "That means someone with access helped them." The head barely looked at the jammer. "Crane, again? You're out of line. Leave it." Thomas inhaled sharply. "If radios fail to park." "They won't." "You can't know that." "I said the matter is closed." But Thomas's instinct screamed otherwise. He had spent his entire life reading tension. And right now, the palace was full of it. Someone inside was preparing the ground, removing obstacles, creating openings. And the target? Two children who had no idea what danger circled around them. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands. He wasn't reckless by nature. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't a hero. He was a protector, one who saw what others refused to see. And he knew with absolute certainty that if he didn't act, the palace would regret it for the rest of its existence. He whispered into the darkness, "I'll stop them, even if I stand alone." And in the quiet of his small apartment, he finally understood the truth. He wasn't fighting a threat anymore. He was fighting a system that didn't want to see danger, a system that didn't want to acknowledge weakness, a system that would rather silence him than face reality. But Thomas didn't care about politics, or reputations, or protocol. He cared about the children. And someone out there was waiting for the right moment to take them. But that moment would not come. Not if Thomas could help it. He straightened up, grabbed his jacket, and whispered to himself, "1 week, 1 shot. I'll be there." He didn't know that the next 7 days would change everything. He didn't know someone else was watching him. He didn't know how close danger already was. But he was ready, because the threat was no longer hiding. It was here. The morning of the park visit arrived with the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, more like the air was holding its breath. London's sky was pale and washed out, still waking up, streets barely stirring. But Thomas Crane, he was already there, 3 hours earlier, not in uniform, not on the palace roster, not officially assigned. He wore jeans, a dark jacket, and a baseball cap, just another face in the early morning crowd. He'd called in sick to his regular shift, knowing that if he showed up on the official detail, someone inside would move him away from the children. They'd been doing that for weeks. He couldn't risk it. The park looked ordinary enough. Joggers, dog walkers, a few early parents pushing strollers. The kind of peaceful scene that makes people forget how fast danger can slide into a space like this without anyone noticing. Thomas walked the perimeter slowly, eyes calm, mind sharp. Entrances, exits, hiding spots, blind corners. He checked everything, circling twice before he saw it. A van, tinted windows, engine off, no markings, parked just slightly out of place, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid suspicion. But someone was inside. The faint blue glow of a phone screen lit the silhouette in the driver's seat. Thomas's pulse tightened. He moved closer, casual and invisible, blending with a handful of pedestrians. He circled behind the van, memorizing the license plate. He snapped a discreet photo and sent it to a friend on the police force. The reply came faster than he expected. Registered to a shell company. No legit owner. Same shell used in a prior kidnapping attempt in France. Be careful. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. There it was. Confirmation he hoped he wouldn't get. He called palace security. There's a suspicious vehicle at the south entrance. Plate matches a shell company linked to abduction attempts. You need to delay the visit. The voice on the other end sounded irritated, bored even. Crane, you're not on the detail today. Stop interfering. Listen to me. Route has been cleared. Everything is secure. Secure? They hadn't even checked the van yet. Thomas hung up the phone, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He knew what this meant. Someone on the inside didn't want a warning. Someone wanted today to proceed exactly as planned. He stayed anyway. If no one else would watch, he would. The park slowly filled with more people. Parents, kids, tourists. The normal noise of life made the danger feel even more surreal. 1 hour before the royal children were scheduled to arrive, the van door slid open. A man stepped out, mid-30s, athletic, hat pulled low, backpack slung over one shoulder. He blended in too well, like someone who had practiced this. Thomas watched from a distance, pretending to tie his shoe. When the man reached a cluster of trees near the playground, he stopped, reached into his bag, and pulled out a device roughly the size of a wallet. Metal, angular, professional. Thomas recognized it instantly. A signal jammer. His stomach dropped. If activated, it would knock out radio communications, security radios, emergency signals, GPS trackers, everything, just for a few minutes. But a few minutes was all they needed. Thomas didn't think. He walked straight toward the man, calm, casual, but fast. The man looked up. For a split second, their eyes locked. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. He knew Thomas didn't belong here. And Thomas knew the man wasn't waiting for a picnic. The man moved first, his hand darting toward his pocket. Thomas closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbed his wrist, twisted sharply. The jammer clattered to the ground. The man yanked backward, but Thomas didn't let go. His voice dropped to a cold whisper. "You leave now, or I make a scene you won't walk away from." The man froze. His pulse hammered under Thomas's grip. Then, slowly, he pulled free, scooped up the jammer, turned, walked quickly toward the van. Thomas followed at a distance. The van's door slammed. The engine roared alive. Tires squealed. They fled, but they didn't get far. Thomas dialed his police contact immediately. Blue van, black tint, heading east. Intercept. 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "We got them. 3 miles away. Found the jammer, fake palace credentials, and a map of the playground marked with routes and escape paths." Thomas felt his chest tighten with relief and fury. The children were minutes away from being placed into a trap palace security had insisted never existed. He stared out at the park, breath cold in the air. He'd prevented the attempt. Yes, but the bigger question burned in his mind. Who inside the palace had cleared the way for it to happen? He didn't have long to wonder, because within the hour, he received a message from a superior, one he barely interacted with. Report to the palace. Immediately, there was no gratitude in the tone, no acknowledgement of what he'd stopped, just urgency and a hint of something darker. When he arrived, they didn't bring him through the main corridors. They escorted him to a side building used only for private interrogations, the kind of place where truth was shaped and reputations were destroyed quietly. Inside the room, gray walls, metal table, cold air, sat a man Thomas knew only by reputation. Martin Hale, deputy head of royal security. Clean suit, still posture, eyes that gave nothing away. "Sit," Hale said calmly. Thomas sat, the door locked behind him. Hale opened a folder, thick, heavy, and slid it across the table. Inside were photos. Thomas meeting contacts. Thomas checking the van. Thomas following suspicious staff. Every move he'd made. "We've been watching you," Hale said. "You've been stepping outside protocol, accessing files without clearance, interfering with operations." Thomas's heart thudded once, hard. "You almost let 2 children get taken," Thomas replied quietly. Hale's smile was thin and sharp. "You're paranoid, Crane, and now you're becoming dangerous." Thomas leaned forward. That van was here because someone inside made space for it. Someone who knew the schedule, the route, the vulnerabilities. Someone with authority. Silence. Hale's face didn't move. Not a twitch. And that told Thomas everything. The threat wasn't only outside. It was sitting right across from him. Hale stood, walked behind Thomas, leaned down. "You have no proof," he whispered. "And when this is over, no one will ever believe you." But Thomas didn't flinch. He turned slowly, meeting Hale's cold stare. "You're wrong," he said softly. "I'm not trying to prove anything." He paused. "I'm trying to stop you." Hale's expression finally cracked. Not fear, not surprise, but fury. But before he could speak, before he could threaten, before he could control the narrative, the door burst open. 3 armed officers stepped inside. Behind them stood a woman in a dark suit, controlled, confident, unmistakably in charge. "Deputy Head Hale," she said, voice like steel, "you are under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and endangerment of protected persons." For the first time, Hale looked genuinely afraid. Thomas sat still, watching, listening, breathing. The day had almost broken. The children had been seconds away from danger. But not today. Not while he was here. The corridors of the interrogation wing were silent as Thomas Crane followed Director Sarah Walsh through a maze of doors, checkpoints, and dimly lit hallways. The adrenaline from the park confrontation still pulsed through his veins, but now a strange calm layered over it. Like the storm had passed, but the sky hadn't decided whether to clear or crack open again. Walsh pushed open a door to a bright, clean room. Sunlight streaming through tall windows, a breathtaking contrast to the cold interrogation chamber. She gestured for him to sit, then poured 2 glasses of water. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said. Thomas offered the faintest nod. "I haven't. Not properly." Walsh sat across from him, elbows on the table, eyes focused. "Let's get straight to it," she said. "Everything you suspected was real." The words hit him harder than he expected. They weren't just validating him. They were confirming his worst fears. She continued, "We've been investigating Hale for 8 months. Quietly, carefully, but we needed evidence, solid evidence. You provided that." "My friend," Thomas said, "he delivered the drive?" Walsh nodded. 2 hours ago. He came to us directly, bypassing the entire command structure. Smart man." Thomas swallowed. He hadn't expected his friend to go around him, but now he realized it had saved his life. Walsh leaned back. Hale wasn't acting alone. He was part of a network, a well-funded one, targeting high-value children across Europe. The royal children were simply the next opportunity. Thomas felt a chill crawl up his spine. Royalty, diplomats, CEOs, children used as leverage. It wasn't just one guard gone corrupt. It was a machine. "How far does it go?" he asked. Walsh hesitated. "Farther than you know, but we're dismantling it piece by piece. Your actions forced Hale to move early, and that exposed his handlers." Thomas exhaled slowly. The weight of what could have happened, what almost happened, settled into his chest like a stone. After a quiet moment, he asked, "What happens now?" Walsh slid a folder across the table. "Now," she said, "your life changes." Inside the folder was a reinstatement letter, a commendation, and a promotion. "You're assigning me back?" he asked softly. "Not just back," Walsh replied. "Forward." She folded her hands. "You'll serve on the closest level of protection. Direct detail. Prince William's children will be under your watch, full time." The breath caught in Thomas's chest. Not pride, responsibility. Walsh leaned forward. "You proved something rare today. When everyone else froze, you acted. When the system cracked, you held the line. When corruption tried to bury you, you stood up anyway." She paused. "But there's something we need from you in return." Thomas met her eyes. "Silence." "Silence," she confirmed. He understood. If the world learned that a royal security officer had collaborated with kidnappers, every extremist group, every unhinged individual, every opportunist would target the family. Better for the truth to disappear quietly. Thomas nodded. "I'll keep the secret." Walsh stood and extended her hand. "Welcome back, Mr. Crane." Thomas shook it, firmly, but as he left the room, he felt the weight of 2 truths. He had saved the children, but the world would never know. Months passed. The palace did not change overnight, but slowly, quietly, the cracks sealed. New protocols were introduced. Staff were reshuffled. Officers who raised questions were suddenly transferred or dismissed. The network was pruned away like diseased roots. Thomas returned to duty, not the same assignments, not the same routines. He stood closer now, watched more carefully, listened more deeply. But something inside him had changed too. He wasn't watching for suspicious vans anymore. He wasn't watching for outsiders. He was watching the system itself. Every day he stood beside the children. He reminded himself, not again, not ever again. They grew. They laughed. They argued with each other. They tripped over their own shoelaces. They lived normal childhoods. Well, as normal as royal children could. And Thomas remained the quiet figure always nearby, never intrusive, never looming, just present. Sometimes one of the children would wave at him. Sometimes they'd ask him something small, "Why do guards wear hats?" Or, "Do you get bored standing so long?" He smiled when appropriate. answered gently. But he never forgot why he was there. He wasn't their friend. He wasn't their hero. He was their shield. Prince William approaches him. One evening, after a long charity event, the family returned to their residence. Thomas took his usual position by the entrance, scanning the grounds as a car rolled in. The children tumbled out, sleepy, half laughing. Kate guided them inside with her usual grace. William lingered by the car, watching Thomas. Then he walked over. "Director Walsh told me everything," William said quietly. "What you did, what you stopped." Thomas straightened. "I was just doing my job, sir." "Not everyone would have done what you did," William replied. His voice softened. "You protected my children when the system failed them." A long silence followed. Then William extended his hand. "Thank you," he said. "Truly, I can never repay what you prevented." Thomas swallowed and shook his hand. "It's an honor, sir. That's all." William nodded once, then returned inside. Thomas remained outside, alone in the cold night air, but feeling, for the first time in months, something warm settle in his chest. The children were safe. He had done his duty, and that was enough. Years later, time moved quietly. Thomas became a mentor for younger officers. He taught them to see patterns others ignored. He taught them to trust their instincts. He taught them to detect danger long before danger had a name. He never mentioned hail, never described the van, never spoke of the threat, but the lessons lived in every word he taught. The network was dismantled entirely. No further attempts were made. The palace became a fortress again, not because of protocols, but because one man had refused to look away. By the time Thomas finally retired, he was older, slower, more weathered, but he carried no regret. There was no celebration, no speech, no medal, just a quiet letter from Director Walsh and a handwritten note from Prince William. "My children will never know your name, but I will never forget it. Thank you for being our guardian in the shadows." Thomas kept that note folded in his wallet for the rest of his life. His final years. He moved to a modest house just outside London. Garden, soft mornings, quiet evenings. Sometimes he'd see royal news on television, photos of William's children, older now, smiling at events. They waved at crowds, unaware of the silent war that had once nearly unfolded around them. And every time Thomas saw their smiles, he felt that same warmth in his chest. They were safe, happy, growing, living, because one man had chosen to stand in the dark so they could live in the light. The legacy no one knew. When Thomas passed away, the palace did not issue a statement. There was no headline, no public tribute, but in a locked drawer in Director Walsh's office, a single confidential report documented every detail, every threat he found, every danger he stopped, every choice he made to protect the children. At the bottom, written in ink, "A true guardian." That was his legacy. Not fame, not recognition, but the lives he protected. And somewhere inside the palace, a nursery window still glowed softly at night. A quiet reminder of the man who watched over for years. A man the world never knew, but who saved the royal family from a story the palace tried to hide.